Andrew, tell me, what is product management?
Product management is that fun aspect of building a business where you have to establish not only what are you building, what is the market you're serving, what are the features and capabilities of it, but then you kind of have to manage that process. And it's a critical component for any startup to have product management because it's easy when you're trying to build something, particularly something new and innovative that other people haven't built before, that you have control around features, the capabilities, that you're ensuring that you're aligning with the roadmap that you've established, and that you're serving the market that you intend to serve. Because if you don't have that good management around it, things can kind of just go off into wild tangents, uncontrolled, and that can lead to some products that just don't work, or they don't meet customer demand, or a variety of other.
So who should be doing the product management at a startup?
That is an interesting question, and that is a internal debate that goes on inside a lot of startups. So often when a startup is very small, it's the founders. The founders are the keepers of the vision of the original design. And so it makes sense that the founders would manage that product. There hits a point in a startup where you really kind of don't want the founder, and you as a founder don't want to be doing product management. Because as a founder, you tend to have a real close intimacy with your products, and you tend to see them in a very particular light, and you have this long history of working with them. And that can skew your objectivity toward building and managing that product. So where that point is along the sort of startup journey it's tough to say. But as a general rule, once you have customers, once you kind of hit that product market fit, and you're scaling the product, it makes sense to start bringing in product managers to manage the entire life cycle of the development. And the founder should be very involved in that. And founders can play a critical role in shaping and designing what happens with a product. But you really need those people who are dedicated to the management and the logistics, as it would be, of product management. And at the very beginning, it's also tempting. Companies will bring in product managers and they'll have them report to sales, or they'll have them report to engineering. And that too can bring out a lot of mistakes because, the saying goes, if you have a product manager who reports to the sales team, then you'll wind up with a sales product. Or if you have them report to an engineering team, you'll have an engineering product. It's really important that product management report to the CEO, the founder, the kind of the rest of the executives, that they have a very sort of direct path up to leadership. And this is so that they can have the authority and they can have the reach within the organization to actually manage the details and, again, the logistics of product management. And if they're only reporting to engineering, it'll be really easy for that engineering team to kind of skew them off into engineering focused features and ignore things that, for example, the sales team might be saying, we really need this feature because our customers are asking for it. We're losing deals because of our competitors. So that's another important dimension of the shift when a startup brings in a product manager or product management team.
It's interesting you said that because, I'm thinking of a company I know, and this is a pretty big company, where the engineers bully the product managers. And I think it just happens because, at some point, the product managers kind of got insecure. And now there is this sort of ethos in the company that the engineers, well, they're the important ones, and everybody else kind of, just does what they say. And then as a result, deadlines get missed because engineers want to keep on engineering, and they're not really that bothered about the customers, or because, that's not their job, right? And so I would say that product managers not only have to have an actual reporting line, but they have to have the robustness to not get bullied, because essentially everybody comes to them, whether it's engineers, whether it's sales, saying, okay, we have to do things my way. And in this company that I'm thinking of, yeah, it's the engineers that bully the product managers, but I'm sure in another company, there are these salespeople who bully the product managers. And what about...
Absolutely. I saw that even in my own.
Oh, interesting. Tell us more.
So I had a somewhat similar situation in the sales team that was, and again, sales teams interact with customers. So they tend to have, they do know what's going on sort of in the field, but sales can be a very, you tend to have a very narrow view of sort of what's going on in the grander picture of a market or trends. Salespeople, let's face it, I mean, they're focused on closing deals. And if they lose a deal to a competitor, they're naturally like, well, we've got to start doing what that competitor does. That's not always the case. I mean, you lose deals for millions of reasons, some of which have nothing to do with your product whatsoever. Um, and in my case, I had a salesperson, sales team that was sort of insistent that they understood what the product should be or where it should go. And that was difficult. It led to a lot of, debates and arguments and such. And as a founder, that was an important role that I took in kind of mitigating that, because it wasn't that the sales team was wrong. It wasn't like everything that coming out of their mouth was incorrect. And many of the things they were saying were very much correct, but certain personalities can kind of skew the process. And in this case, rather than having engineers who were the bullies, I had a salesperson who was the bully. And that salesperson, again, it wasn't that they were wrong. It's just that they were they were bullying and kind of pushing their perspective at the expense of everybody else's perspective. And that wasn't going to work. So as a founder, I was able to step in and kind of help moderate that process, because I had the authority as the founder, as sort of the keeper of the original vision. And I could sort of piecemeal out the areas where I'm like, okay, the salespeople are right. This is an issue. We need to deal with it. Or this just simply isn't something we're ready for yet. I had the ability to do that. And I think that's where product management teams, it's really important for them to have that tight relationship with the founder or the CEO or both. In my case, it was both, at least for a while, because they can often become those arbitrators and help sort of, help deal with those clashes that can happen between different teams, and be able to sort of extract out the things that people are saying that are reasonable and really should be done.
And Brian Chesky, the CEO and co-founder of Airbnb, has recently spoken out about the fact that he has really returned to focusing on the product. And so I think, the journey was that obviously he was super focused on the product at the beginning. He is a designer by training. So designing the product and the product experience was super important. But then, it became a big company, right? And so he became a big company CEO, and he couldn't focus on the product. That was literally impossible. And he then said that actually one of the reasons why he thought Airbnb started having problems was because he was focusing on strategic initiatives and being a big company CEO rather than on the product. And so he said that he's now kind of doing both. I don't know how you managed to do that with a company the size of Airbnb, but I think the intent at least shows us how important, how critical it is to a company. And so have you heard Brian saying this? And if you have, or if you haven't, what do you think of this approach? At a company at that level, should the CEO be really focusing on this, or should he go and, speak to investors and be the figurehead?
Well, I think my response would be, this is more of a founder issue than I think it is a CEO issue. So let me make the first big important distinction. There's a big distinction between being a CEO and being a founder. They're not the same. Now, a lot of founders are CEOs. I was both a CEO and a founder, that's the case where you're not only building the company, you're also managing and running the company. And it's a lot harder. Let me just tell you. Some founders are not the CEOs. They go off and become CTOs or something else. So I think the challenge is that a CEO job has particular expectations and requirements on it. One of those is investors, managing a board. There's a whole set of kind of CEO tasks that the CEO has to do. And those can become very time consuming, particularly landing investment. I mean, that is a full-time job in and of itself. If you're having to do that and manage the product, and do sales and do everything else in the company, which is my experience. I kind of was doing everything.
Yep. Me too.
It becomes very overwhelming. And yeah, you just, you tend to shift to the things that are that immediate emergency. Like in my case, I spent a lot of time doing sales because I had to get deals closed, right? And I knew that if I kept the deals coming in, that was going to help me get the investment. So it was sort of like this chicken and the egg problem of, in order for me to get investment, I got to close deals. In order for me to close deals, it's like, so I had to kind of keep that ball rolling. So I think what happens is as a company grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, people who are in these CEO roles, their ability to do those kind of other things simply become, it just isn't enough hours in the day. And they have to rely on other people. They have to delegate those things. They have to rely on other teams. And you get to a point where simply you have almost no sort of, as a CEO, you have almost no input or influence on what's going on in those places, or very, very little, only to the point of, coming in sort of for briefings and being able to say, yeah, that sounds good, or no, I don't like that, or hey, we need to rethink that. So you have the ability to kind of shape direction, but you really don't have the ability to get into that nitty gritty. Now, if you're a founder and you're the person who built that product and you're the person who the vision is kind of came from, that can be really detrimental, because once products get sort of separated off from their founders, if the teams don't kind of stick to that original vision, or stick to a vision, I should say, it doesn't even necessarily have to be the original vision, but if they don't stick to some of those original things, yeah, products will start to kind of wander off in all sorts of weird directions. And you get products that it's like, you know, what's whose idea was this? Who came up with these weird features or strange capabilities, or who? In many cases, it's why didn't you implement these capabilities? So what I think he's basically realizing that a lot of founders realize when their companies get really large is that there's key areas as a founder you can influence your startup once it kind of gets to a certain level. And your involvement is really important. But you need to sort of be very judicious about where you apply that sort of founder vision. And product management is one of the key areas. I would say that's probably the most key area, aside from, maybe some parts of the sales process as well. But product management is where founders can really make a fundamental and big difference. And it's the area where they should be involved. So I think what you're hearing, say is, look, we're big, but we're slipping. I need to put my founder energy where it really should be, where I can make the biggest difference on the future. And he's right. I would completely agree.
As you say, founders have the vision, and this is not only about tech. So actually, another story about another CEO of a company that everybody would have heard of, which is Starbucks. So Howard Schultz, very famously, he's no longer the CEO, and he has actually been criticizing the current management for basically relying too much on the app. And he says that the original product, which is the Starbucks coffee shop, it's now soulless because everybody is buying coffee through the app, so they're not interacting with the baristas. They're not sitting around. It's just, go in, get your coffee shot, and continue. And whether it's kind of ethical for somebody as well known to criticize his successors, I mean, I'm not sure about that, but it just shows that if you've created the product, even if, Howard Schultz, he's made loads of money, he doesn't need any more. But if you've created that product and then somebody else takes it in another direction, so in this case, adds digital transformation to it, and then it's going to be really, really hard to stay quiet. I mean, Howard Schultz probably knows he shouldn't say it, but he probably can't help himself, which, I understand.
And I understand as well. I mean, it makes sense. When you're a founder, you're very passionate about what you've built, and it's your baby, right? And so and you have and you tend to be able to see the whole picture, which very few people can. And in the case of Howard Schultz, he started with a very specific vision, and that vision is essentially what got Starbucks to where they are today. And to sort of change that to something else, it might make sense as a business and it might make them more money overall, but it does kind of stray from what his original intent was. And I think this is where companies and CEOs who kind of come in after the fact, it's important for them to think about that bigger picture of where do they want to go and what was that vision. Because in many cases, if you can manage both of those simultaneously and retain the original vision by still being able to push and move forward, you could ultimately end up building something that is quite a bit more impressive as a product and as a market. And I'll pull out the obvious example here, which would be Apple. Apple is a prime example of a company that's stuck, once Jobs returned, I should say, Steve Jobs returned, it stuck very true to his vision and his design and everything. And now they're worth, a zillion trillion dollars. So
It was actually Tim Cook who added more shareholder value than Steve Jobs, if I'm not mistaken. So, which is interesting, but they're such different skill sets. Inventing something completely new and then basically incrementally improving it are completely different things. And so, let's
very much so.
let's move away to the other side of the spectrum. So basically the super early stage. So I am about to start running the non-technical founders accelerator, and we are literally starting in a couple of days. And one of the first lessons that we're going to learn is product management. And so these are really early stage people. A lot of them don't even know that product management is a thing. So when you are speaking to these young entrepreneurs who've never heard the term product management, and then, they're going to go and see a bunch of 2-year courses and they're going to think, I don't have the time to do that. What are the key things that these people need to learn if, since they're starting companies, they need to learn as much as they can in like literally a week. So what should they focus on?
In the early stages of a startup, product management is fundamentally a sales job. And a lot of founders, particularly non-technical ones, particularly new entrepreneurs, don't have sales skills. And being able to sell an idea to people, not a product, but an idea, a concept, a design, is equally, if not more, important than selling the actual product. And this is so critical in that early stage is not only do you have to understand your own idea, but you have to be able to communicate that idea and sell it to people. You need to get people interested in what it is you're doing.
So when you mean sales, you don't actually mean selling it for money. You mean selling it to get people excited and get people on board. So selling it to get co-founders on board,
Correct.
team members on board, maybe investors, maybe bloggers to
Correct.
write about you. Or, to get into my accelerator, you have to do a sales job to convince me.
It's all sales in those early stages. And if you're not comfortable in that sales role, you'll struggle. I mean, I did. Many founders do because they get into the nitty gritty of building the product or its features, which are all important. And it's not to say that you shouldn't do that, but you can build something that is absolutely brilliant and amazing and has all these incredible features or capabilities. But if nobody knows about it, they don't understand what the heck you're trying to accomplish, then kind of all your effort was for naught. You almost might as well not have done it in the first place. You have to get people kind of on board with your vision, get them to understand what it is you're doing. What are the goals? What are the things you're trying to get to? And this only is going to get more important when you do try to get investors or co-founders, because you need to convince them of why this is something that's meaningful or important or valuable, because that isn't going to necessarily be apparent to everybody like it is you, the founder. Oftentimes when
And
you're a founder, you have this you get so involved in building it that you just inherently understand its value. Like, oh, how could you not see how this is, incredible tool? Well, you can't, because you're not inside that head of the founder. And so that's why I say that sales ability, that ability to define what it is you're doing, define the problems you're solving, define your capabilities, align those with what other people need. Those are fundamental kind of components of sales. And you need to do those in that early stage. So that's that's what I would tell the early entrepreneurs is you're going to have to get your sales skills improved, and work on it.
It's interesting because I think non-technical people, when they are creating a tech product or getting into the tech world, say obviously non-technical founders, they're creating something, but maybe somebody wants to transition career into a digital company. And they're so freaked out by the fact that they're not technical and what they don't know. I find often that they go too deep and then try to just only focus on the technology, learn all of the jargon. And actually, that's not what's expected of them because, they're not trying to get a job as a C++ developer. That's not what they're doing. So yes, they need to know something, like they need to be able to speak to developers and like, I don't know, for example, explain how their customers are going to behave, what kind of internet connection they're going to be using, what kind of devices they're going to be using. And then based on that, engineers can build a tech stack, but they don't actually need to go and say, oh, build it in this language. And I find that, I've already had questions from the super keen founders who want to get started early, and they're saying, "Oh, what language should we learn about before we start?" And I'm like, "You shouldn't. If a non-technical founder is telling engineers what language they should be building in, that's nobody's going to be happy, and you're going to produce something really terrible."
I was going to say in those early stages, you also have to give yourself the freedom to fail. And you have to give yourself the freedom to explore many different sort of ways of doing things. And that's why, and particularly this is important when it comes to the technologies you pick or the architectures you pick. You might go down the path of one particular tool or architecture or framework or, whatever that, and get, pretty far down the path into development only to realize that that isn't going to work, or it doesn't scale, or there's too many clumsy components, or there's too much manual sort of nonsense you're going to have to do, or there's some weird dependency that's going to happen later on there's a million different reasons, and you have to give yourself the freedom to back up and kind of start over down a different path.
The
Again, I
freedom and the
experienced something very
cash.
similar.
I
And
said
well, it's not always a lot of cash. It's that ability to then know, okay, this isn't working, and people fall into that sunk
sunk
cost
cost
fallacy
fallacy.
all the time.
Yeah.
Really bad for founders because you get really deep into something and then you think, I have to keep going all the way down this. It's like, no, you probably should just give up and start over on a different path, because just keep doing the same thing over and over again and beating your head against the wall isn't a good idea.
What I meant about the cash is that in early stages, people might get a tiny friends and family check, or maybe some sort of grant funding from an innovation body. Or if they're in a corporate startup, then the CFO is going to say, okay, I'm just going to give you a few grand to experiment with this thing. And then if that goes well, we can fund you some more. And I think I have certainly done this. I remember when I first got my first tiny check, I was like, I know exactly what to do with all of it. Yeah. So do we know what happened next? So I spent the vast majority of it, to be honest, on something useful. But then that wasn't the only, but then only as we started working, we realized that actually there's a whole bunch of other things that we need. And without those other things, we can't move forward. But I was like, we've literally got 5% of our capital left. What are we going to do? And, we figured it out because when you're a founder, you figure it out somehow. But I
Right?
see, I see people kind of doing similar things all the time. They get a small check and they're like, I know exactly what to do, and I'm just going to spend this, I don't know, $10,000 on this particular development or this particular feature. And once we have this, then money rain will come down upon us. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. No, it doesn't happen. And it's easy as a founder to get lost inside something that might be genuinely very cool or innovative. but forget that, again, if people don't understand it or you're unable to demonstrate it to people, then you've kind of wasted your time and energy. And I'm thinking to pull from my own experience, I headed up the development of a new version of our platform. We were moving it to a Microsoft platform. And Microsoft, in this case, was a very different framework and environment as Azure. And when we got to sort of the latter stages of the development, the team had done all this great engineering work and they built all these really cool things, but there was basically no front end. There was no GUI. The visual aspect of it was like nothing. And like kind of didn't even occur to them that that was an issue. And I'm like, guys, nobody sees the value of what you just did. I mean, like, you've done all this amazing work. And if I, as an outsider, look at this, I'm going to go, what the, this is nothing. And I said, you're sort of, you're hiding all of your ingenious engineering here. And so you've got to kind of develop a better looking GUI. And this particular product, they were kind of like, come on, why do we need this? We're all engineers. We can do everything on the command line. And I'm like, because it's not going to sell. Nobody's going to buy this. So, and again, that's that sort of tunnel vision that can happen in the process. And in my case, being the founder, I was able to kind of see that bigger picture and help them through that mistake that they almost made. And ultimately the product turned out fine. It's all good. But
that's a
yeah,
really
I
good
mean,
example.
it's easy to, yeah, it's easy when you're sort of at the beginning of these to think you got it all figured out, but you can miss one or two things. And those mistakes, those failures that you make along the way are fantastic opportunities to learn what you should be doing. And as I would tell every developer, everybody, don't waste a failure. Like if you have a mistake or something goes wrong, don't waste it. Learn what you can from that, because the secret to your future success is embedded in every single failure you make. You just have to be willing to look at that failure, analyze it, and think about why you failed. And inside there are the answers you need. And a lot of people get sort of hung up on this, I failed and I'm an idiot and I'm no good. And I'm like, that's not a healthy way to deal with failure. Failure is a fantastic opportunity to get better for the next version.
I often think that the only way I learn is through failure. And I'm now trying to learn from the failures of others, because I'm thinking, does it always have to be my failure? Because it's a really painful way to learn lessons. So now I'm trying to see, okay, let's let other people pay the cost. And like maybe I can lower my cost of learning a little bit. Um, I would say I'm still not there yet. I'm mostly learning by falling flat on my face and embarrassing myself in public. But here we go. So you actually have a lot of useful startup advice in this book that you sent me, The Founder's User Manual, Practical Strategies for the Startup Leader. And it's a super practical book. So could you say just a couple of words about, who it's for and how people should use it?
Well, speaking of failure, that book is really a catalog of all my failures. And I failed a lot. I mean, I ran a business for 26 years and I did pretty much everything wrong the first time. I mean, I hired the wrong people. I said the wrong things. I focused on the wrong things. I made all those mistakes. And at some point, after I became successful and I was able to exit my company, I realized I had sort of this huge database of best practices that I had learned from all those failures. And like you just mentioned, I was hoping that maybe I could help other founders learn from my mistakes. And that requires a certain level of maturity, I will say. It's difficult to get to that place sort of as a person where you can reflect on your own failures, but also then look at other people's failures and see them in sort of context to what you need to do. And so my book is designed for those young entrepreneurs, new startup people, or leaders really in any size organization who want some of that practical, behind the scenes sort of ways of building and growing a business. And some of the things in there, they might seem a little obvious when you read them. Like I always mention the one, you've got to get paid all the time, every time, with absolute consistency. And that might seem like a kind of a, well, duh, like, of course you need to get paid kind of thing. But I am often amazed at how many founders I meet. And it's like they just do not prioritize
Mm-hmm.
invoicing their customers and getting paid. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's like priority one. You
Yeah.
have to get paid all the time, every time, without failure. And if you have customers not paying you, then you're not a company, you're a charity or
Mm-hmm.
something else.
Mm.
And so it's a very basic principle of running a business that you have to just instill upon yourself and
Mm-hmm.
the people around you, that you have to do those basic kind of things. And there's a lot of good practices on how to do that so that you can collect effectively. I mean, I collected 99.9% of the invoices I put out as a company. Now, part of that was, I insisted on doing good work.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part of it is that I had a process. And I
Mm-hmm.
had a process because I didn't have a process for many
Mm-hmm.
years. And I failed many, many times. And I realized I can't keep doing that because I need to get paid. So
Yeah.
that's who the book is designed for, and I've tried to lay it out in sort of a user manual
Mm-hmm.
style of just, here's the way to do it, rather than
Mm-hmm.
rather than a lot of theories and
Mm-hmm.
frameworks and kind of flowery
Mm-hmm.
concepts. I try to give people, like, look, here's just sort of a practical way of doing this.
I've been enjoying reading it. And yeah, I am learning from your mistakes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. And so I would recommend to people check the book out. And Andrew, this has been a super enlightening conversation. And thank you very much for your time with us today.
Well, thank you, Sophia. It's been great chatting with you today, and I appreciate it.